Okay, let's explore the topic of marriage. So, marriage is a couple of things, but what I want to do is add in some uncommon and focus on the uncommon dimensions of marriage. So, of course, marriage is a legal document, a piece of paper, and a ritual that typically involves lifetime commitment in some way. However, what is marriage really? The first thing I want to look at is personas and ages. So, if you imagine my two hands and you've got contact or a marriage of the tip of the finger here, you could say that's marriage. That's marriage of the tip of the middle fingers. It's not a very strong marriage. It's just marriage of the tips of my middle fingers for as long as it lasts, meaning there's a present, regulated, connected, attuned connection. Now, if we go into something like this and create something that is sustainable and feels good to all sides, all the skin surfaces, etc., it's comforting, it's supportive, it's strengthening, you can say this is a much stronger marriage. And this illustrates the issue of ages and personas. So I want you to imagine that like a tree, we each have a series of ages, starting with that center core of being born, and that every year a new layer of who we are gets added to the existing tree that we've been growing from. And so we get bigger and we get bigger. But at the core, all of those other ages are right there. They're not on the surface, but they are in the present. What I mean by that is a tree is not just composed with its most recent ring. It's composed of the entirety of every age. So every age matters. And this is one of our axes, or one of our dimensional axes, is age. And so in this sense, you have in a relationship, you have a relationship between my ages and your ages and your partner's ages. So on this axis of time, you can start to see how, for example, how does your 1-year-old relate to your partner's 1-year-old? How does your 7-year-old relate to your partner's 7-year-old? So you've got the parallel age axis, but you've also got the kind of complex overlay axis where you have how does your own 14-year-old relate to your own 3-year-old? How does your own 14-year-old relate to your 4-year-old, your 5-year-old, etc.? How does your 14-year-old relate to your partner's 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old? So you've got this complex overlay of relationships. And we like to sum it up and call it chemistry, and it is. But it's a very specific kind of chemistry in which all of these different ages are overlapping, and they all have an emotional and a mental and a visceral experience of one another. So here's another thing to think about and remember. We, the adult, emerged, blossomed out of the child. So I'm 42, And the 42-year-old doesn't exist unless a 30-year-old exists, out of which the 42-year-old grew. The 30-year-old doesn't exist unless an 18-year-old was there, out of which he grew. The 7-year-old doesn't exist without an infant. Now, this is a really important point because it gets to the heart of why some people destroy and implode their chemistry and relationship without knowing why. And it goes something like this. I'm a sneering, confident, arrogant nerd who's trying to look good, and I like the cool, sexy, hot, calculating, shrewd wife that I'm seeing in my 38-year-old counterpart. But I can't stand having anything to do with a snot-nosed, crying, weak, terrified, shamed, shaking 7-year-old. It just so happens that my partner grew out of that 7-year-old. Everything she is came from that 7-year-old. If that 7-year-old doesn't exist, she doesn't exist. Now, this is very much like a gardener who sees a delicious pomegranate and loves the pomegranate and worships that pomegranate, but hates the mud. Doesn't really get roots, doesn't really care about the soil. He's interested in that pomegranate. And he may put, fertilizer, fragrance, decoration on the pomegranate. But it's not going to do any good to that pomegranate. The only thing that will create an even sweeter and even bigger pomegranate is the watering of the root, is the care for the soil, the care for the quality of the dirt, the mud. All that's dark, dense, muddy, dirty, all of that manure, all of that dark stuff down in the soil is what produces the sweetness of the fruit. So an uneducated gardener will even go so far as to just cut off the trunk of the tree. I don't want to deal with that dirt. I'm just going to preserve the beauty of these leaves and this tree and even more of the fruit. I'm going to just pamper it and mist it and do this. But I'm going to just cut this tree off because I don't want anything to do with that dirt. And so in this way, the tree quickly dies. The fruit shrivels, no matter how much pampering is done, because the only way to really grow a healthy fruit is to grow a healthy tree. And so if we understand this and learn from this basic gardening principle, we realize that to get exquisite fruit, it's all about loving the little girl, all about loving the little boy in our partner. So when that little boy is filled with wonder, it's pausing to let that in. It's kind of basking that little boy in safety and celebration. It's, hooray, you're wonderful. It's celebrating that little boy, that little girl. It's caring for that little girl and that little boy, where all of the good stuff in the relationship comes out. Now, it's really hard to do that when one's partner is also ashamed and rejects and judges their own roots, their own dark, moist, vulnerable, and messy past. So, a very important part in screening a potential partner is, are they willing to be seen? And are they willing to join you in loving and adoring, not the fruit, but the roots, the past, the young parts, the innocence, those parts that are so overwhelmed and terrified, they desperately need someone to be there and reassure them, loving those parts. And you get 10 times the return on investment for loving those parts. You know, it's just engineering. We come from that part. The culture smears it with shame, and then those of us who are lucky break through that shame and come into this beautiful fruit, and then the society lauds us with praise without owning the absurdity of shaming and smearing and judging all of the material that out of which something beautiful came. Now, going back to marriage, the real marriage is, do we love all of those ages? And particularly infancy to 18, you know, 0 to 18 are some of the most important years, and the youngest years are the most important. So when our partner feels that their little girl is safe and loved and can be seen and can fall apart and can be scared and can cry and can be overwhelmed and can tuck into our arms, that little girl loves us with a passion, a fury, a loyalty, an unconditionality, and a dedication that no 40, 50, 60-year-old, 30, 20-year-old woman can match. Because that passion, that loyalty, that devotion, it's at its peak at 7 years old. So it's loving the 7-year-old in our partner that creates that level of love and trust. It's loving the 7-year-old and making sure that her vulnerability and her trust is protected, that leads to that innocence of miracles. And it's, of course, the innocence and miracles that come out of it that lead to a magical and enduring long-term relationship. Without that, you have no enduring long-term relationship. So we have this, this magical way of producing fruit, which is to go back consciously and semi-consciously and just love and adore and butter and caress those parts of our partner, the youngest, the most tender, the most vulnerable, the most innocent, the most needy, the most desperate. Desperation is a very, very rich field of fruit. When we welcome desperation and honor it with gifts, the amount of fruit that it produces in months, in years, is just so incredible. So this is the age axis. But there's another axis. It's called the axis of personas. So, we're one person, but we have many expressions. We're a slightly to very different person in every context. When we're at a party, when we're having sex, when we're drunk, when we are going on a walk, when we're meditating, when we're at work, when we're with this client, when we're with that client, when we're with this friend, when we're with that friend. So we have this circle of personas. And this is also where the archetypes come in as a general guideline. The warrior, the lover, the fool, the wise one, the streetwise one. We have these different archetypes. And we all have this full expression. We have it in our lover personas. There's the nurturing parent, There's the best friend who's just being present in sex. There's the warrior in sex. There's the protector. There's the streetwise. There's the manipulator. There's all these different personas in all of our life, and also in our sexuality. And the question is, in marriage, how do these personas get on? How does your lover get on with your warrior? Is your lover always nagging your warrior to not be a warrior? Is your warrior always shaming your lover for being too soft? Or does the lover honor the warrior? Thank you for protecting that which is sacred. And does the warrior honor the lover by remembering, you are the reason I fight? Within the dance of self and within the dance of our partner, we have a complex series of relationships between our personas, ages, and personas at every age. It's very rich. There are thousands of us, or I should say thousands of relationships in any deep, complex romantic relationship. Thousands of relationships. My 8-year-old warrior with your 2-year-old lover. Your 3-year-old lover with my 15-year-old wise one. My fool with your 40-year-old wise one. You've got all of these dances. So what is marriage? It's flow. It's flow with respect, with love, with care. With respect means seeing. You see, if you don't see, you bang into one another. When you see, you attune. And that's what respect is. You attune and you bond with flow, with gratitude, with love. And the more of us that flows, let's say my 17-year-old critic isn't liked at all by your 7-year-old innocence. Your 7-year-old innocence doesn't like my 17-year-old critic at all. And so let's say whenever I get scared, I go into my 17-year-old critic because he's really strong. He knows he's right. He's really clear about the way the world works, and he loves criticizing everyone else, and that's what he does. So when I get scared and I'm looking and I feel kind of disoriented and uncertain, I want something certain. My 17-year-old critic says, I'll handle it. I'll just show up and criticize everything and you'll feel great. And so that's my pattern. But my partner's 7-year-old innocence always feels smaller, always feels unsafe, always retreats from my 17-year-old critic. Well, what it means is that we might be having a great marriage and a great attunement until I get scared. Then I go into 17-year-old critic, where now 80% of me is in this one persona. And then that shrinks and amplifies the part of my partner that feels criticized. And so the relationship goes down. It becomes a very weak marriage until I can get out of my 17-year-old critic. So a strong marriage is when the vast majority of who we are is attuned and flowing not only with ourselves, because ultimately it kind of is that way. It's just in a marriage or in a deep partnership, we get to have parts of ourselves externalized. We have the great privilege of seeing what is in fact our 7-year-old innocence, who's also shriveled up by our 17-year-old critic. And we get to see how the parts of us are appropriate and create flow and love and connection and don't. Create friction, create fear, create dissonance. So a real marriage is this convergence of ages and personas in love, in respect, in flow, creating value, growth, awareness, and contribution to the world. So this is a true marriage. It doesn't matter if you have a paper, it doesn't matter if you live together for 10 years, for 50 years, or for a week. It doesn't even matter if you get married. You are married when you've got the strong flow of ages and personas. And the dance of growing a marriage is the dance of bringing more ages and more personas consciously online into the relationship. So that, you took really good care of my 3-year-old who's in trauma. And so because of that, my 2-year-old is showing up, and he's going to trust you to love him like you loved my 3-year-old. Let's see what happens. Because if you do pour out that love, and if my 2-year-old does accept it, the 2-year-old is changed. The 2-year-old transforms into something beautiful. And now that beauty grows up through the ages much faster than the original growing process, but grows up through the ages, transforming who the adult is to now include and incorporate this beautiful 2-year-old. This is marriage. This is transcendence. This is magic. And so what I want to close with is the ritual, the ceremony. It's beautiful of getting married. But the real ritual of getting to know oneself and sharing oneself gracefully and gently, beautifully and exquisitely with another human being. This is the true marriage. And it's one of the reasons why we all have this need to find a balance point between boredom and variety. It's one of the, another way of saying it is we each have a stimulation threshold where things need to be changing and happening enough that we're not bored, but not so much that we collapse and overwhelm. So it's somewhere between boredom and chaos. So in that sweet point, which we all have a separate point, we need that. And one way to do that is to have 5 or 10 different lovers. And we love this one with this persona, and they can accept this persona. We love this woman and this man, and they draw this part of us out. And there's something very beautiful in that. I was once in a dance with one man and 6 women. And it just happened that way because that it was mostly time, like I really wanted a full-on experience. And particularly in America, you ask people how much time they have, and it's like, I've got next Saturday, I've got next Monday, I'm available Tuesdays, but we try and pack our relationships into these very complex programs of our rich lives. And so, I basically had, 6 or 7 people that had about a day a week. And what I noticed is that, I laughed 3 times more with one person because they honored my laugh. They enjoyed my laugh, and I always like to make people happy. So my laugh just came forth 3 times more than with any other person. With one person, I would really exquisitely focus on the food because she tasted everything. She tasted it. I was like, wow. It was, she let me take her into a whole new world through taste. And so I was always, fiddling with stuff and what about this? And I would even kind of, with the same dish, serve it in different spoonfuls and stuff and flavor each spoonful. It was just really exquisite. She was in heaven. Whereas one person didn't like my cooking at all and everyone else was just kind of ignoring it like that's nice. And so it didn't draw out the exquisite chef in me. And another person, we had these really deep conversations. And another person was platonic. She was, afraid of sexuality, but she liked these really nurturing cuddles. So she cuddled. And not only that, she was an artist of gifts. She gave me more exquisite and attuned gifts than anyone else in my whole life ever has or had. She gave these exquisite gifts and, just filled with nuance. So I responded with cards and with nuance myself, to match. And it was like so fun to give each other gifts because it felt balanced. And what I'm saying is that we can find a person in our life, romantic, platonic, sensual, sexual, all these different gradations, friendship, male, female. We can find these people in our life to have these rich tapestries that evoke all that we are. And we can do the same thing with one person, with a person who's committed to growing, to letting us into each age, to exploring and learning about each of their personas, to teaching us, there's a new persona on the horizon here. Because this has gone well, there's another petal that wants to open up. And so it's this incredible orchestra of personas and ages is between every two people. The key is it will not open, it will not blossom if on the way to opening at any point, it's like a flower, any point towards opening, it can be cut, it can be frozen, it can be contained to where there's no space. It's like even if I was only with one of those women, because they were containing the time, to a 4-hour block a week, all those richness of my other personas would never have opened with them because there wasn't enough time, as if I had 7 blocks of 4 hours. It's like 7 blocks of sunlight for a flower to open up in compared to just a 4-hour block. A 4-hour block might be enough, but for some plants, it's relative. And it's infinite. It's connected to the amount of light that opens up. And so we get to pick whether it's a traditional marriage and 3 or 4 different types of friends, whether we just really like a couple of our personas and so we just have a few deep relationships that bring that out, or whether we have multiple lovers and kind of get to explore and see, which person brings which side of us out and get to share and honor that with them. The depth of the marriage is related to the complexity of attunement. The more ages and the more personas are in flow, are in healing, are in joy, are in trust, the richer the magic. It is the chemistry. This is the chemistry. And it can be hundreds deep. And it can keep growing. Enjoy the magic. Enjoy the magic of marriage. and honor the process of opening day by day, hour by hour, and seeing what new is there, which persona wants to come out now, and finding those environments that allow you and your partner to grow, to become all that you are.